Welcome back to another video, and in this video we're going to be looking at the Anti-Semitism, Hate and Extremist Bill that recently passed in January 2026. As you are all aware, the Bondi massacre initiated some new laws, and what we ended up with was a 500-page hate speech law that now controls all of our lives. So that's been condensed down into this Explanatory Memorandum, Combating Anti-Semitism and Extremism Bill. Anyway, 300 pages is 300 pages, and I haven't had time to read the whole thing. So what I've done is taken it, put it into Chat GPT, condition the responses with a series of questions so we can see how it's going to affect our lives. Just a disclaimer, I'm not a criminal lawyer, I'm just as an Australian citizen. I have worked in the legal field of land use, but not in criminal law or anything like that. Just an Australian citizen that is interested to see how this new law is going to affect our lives in the day-to-day workings. I have put ChatGPT's responses into a thing called Grok, which just gives us a nice little picture to look at. So there are going to be some spelling mistakes in it, but it's better than boring people with just, Microsoft Word pages. So basically, that memorandum, explanatory memorandum of the hate speech law, it was about 150 to 200 pages by memory. And basically a summary is that the Combating Anti-Semitism, Hate and Extremism Bill 2026 strengthens Australia's hate crime and hate speech framework by targeting conduct that incites hatred, threats, or violence against people, defined on their protected attributes. So there is a list of protected attributes that we can't violate anymore, not that we should, but such as race, ethnicity, religion, sex, disability. The bill is explicitly drafted not to infringe the implied freedom of political communication under the Australian Constitution and does not criminalise lawful political debate, criticism, or commentary. Hopefully this stuff is upheld because from what we can see, the Constitution does protect our freedom, implied freedom of political communication. Through this discussion, the key clarification was that Australian law protects people but not ideas. So we can still debate ideas, we can still make comments about ideas, and we'll go into that soon. Criticising ideologies, religious doctrines, scriptures, political movements, or extremist beliefs, even harshly, remains lawful. And I will just add, ChatGPT, if you have a paid subscription and you are conditioning these responses, it is regarded as being a PhD expert in these fields, especially at interpreting the physical downloaded documents that we're able to condition the responses from. So if this is completely inaccurate, let me know in the comments and which sections are inaccurate, and we'll see if we can. This is just for general interest only. So the outcome is that your freedom to engage in political speech, world affairs, commentary, and criticism of religion or ideology has not been removed. The legal boundary is crossed only where speech targets the protected groups, we'll go into that, as people incite hatred, violence, or serious harm. It does seem like they are only targeting hatred, violence, and serious harm. Serious harm is quite obvious. Hatred, just because someone's offended, does that mean it's hatred? We'll get to that later. Not where it expresses disagreement, moral condemnation, or political opinion. That's exactly right. In the Australian democracy, a democracy is freedom of conscience. People that are able to take their freedom of conscience, their thoughts, their internal dialogue, and externalize it into speech really should be protected in our Constitution. Hopefully that will eventuate with the next federal election, but let's go to the next slide. And these are all ChatGPT responses to the actual memorandum document, which is a short-term explainer of the actual act. And this is just so we can see quick snippets. The protected groups under the Australian hate speech, hate crime law, a group is protected only when defined by an inherent or core personal attribute, not by beliefs, opinions, or behaviour. So we still can criticise beliefs and religious doctrine and scripture and text, because these are all ideas. You can have a collision of ideas without being hatred. It's just an opposing opinion. Protected attributes. Speech can trigger hate speech or hate crime provisions only if it targets people because of race, ethnicity, national origin is very broad, colour, some people are colourblind, and religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, intersex status, and disability. I think some of the examples that we're looking at, religion is an interesting one. So if you refer to an individual, from what I can see from the examples that we looked at, if you call someone a Christian this or Christian that, that is hate speech. If you're talking about the actual, whichever part of the Bible or whichever part of the scriptures are led to believe that's what they're called, then you can debate ideas. That's how I sort of interpret all this, is you can't attack the person, but you can attack scripture, and people can believe whatever scripture they want to believe, but the scripture is still always open to debate. So these categories come from the criminal code, the anti-discrimination law, which is already in effect, but are reaffirmed through the bill's explanatory memorandum. So it sounds like they're just emphasizing these are the problem areas that you're not to cross, and the penalties must be getting harder. I heard somewhere that it was either 5 or 15 years, which is still, in my opinion, political opinion, well, I still got it, is very communist style. To say that if you're voicing your opinion about something and you use the wrong verb unknowingly, you can do 15 years in prison. That's not a democracy. That's very close to communism, if not very draconian communist state. That's why free speech is paramount in democracies. You have to be able to talk about things. But let's go to the next slide. And what does Chat GPT say? What is not a protected group? This is very important. Yes. The following are explicitly not protected: political ideologies, left-wing, right-wing, socialism, conservatism, extremists, protesters, activists, that's a ChatGPT mistake, religious doctrines or belief systems. Religious texts. Every text that's ever been written in human history, I'm led to believe it goes back about 6,000 years, but anything should always be open to debate. We shouldn't accept it as absolute truths without able to scrutinize why people believe in things. Absolutely. Believing in something is the basis of decision making. Governments, foreign or domestic, terrorists or extremist organizations, cultural practices, philosophical positions. Governments is an interesting one. Here in Australia, we do have implied freedom of political communication because we live in a democracy, and the political parties are elected representatives by the people. So you can't limit freedom of political communication because otherwise the democracy can't function. And apparently it's not, apparently it is protected, but we'll get to that in a minute. So criticism of Islam, Christian theology, the Quran, Bible, Marxism, any other socialism, this is just what ChatGPT has come up with in no particular order. They're all written texts that should be able to be scrutinized and should be able to be debated in interpretations. We shouldn't have one perspective of interpretation of a 1,000-year-old text or 5,000-year-old text. So nationalism is not hate speech because these are ideas. You're not aiming these ideas at people. I think this bill is really getting to that fact that you can talk about many areas, but when you start attributing them to the actual individuals, that's what they're trying to sort of discern between. Are you debating an idea, or are you attributing that idea onto a physical person, which then can be deemed as hate speech? I wouldn't like that sort of hate speech being aimed at me. Internet be kind. But I also wouldn't want to limit someone else's freedom of speech to say what's on their mind. I think that's part of a strong democracy. When you take away free speech on any topic, then you sort of democracy dies, in my opinion. So this is the question that I asked ChatGPT. I'm an Australian citizen and am concerned that my freedom of speech has been violated because of the passing of this hate bill. Can you tell me if the Australian Constitution protects my political speech and speech in general from the effects of this bill? Please interpret this bill so I know the limits of free speech or speech in Australia. And yes, I realise there are some spelling mistakes throughout this. I take what Chat GPT has done and I put it into Grok. Grok sort of puts it all into an image for me, and sometimes it's not perfect, even though what goes in was spelt correctly. But we live and we learn, don't we? So does the Australian Constitution protect your speech? Short answer, yes, but only in a specific way. Australia does not have a general constitutional right to free speech. Look, I'm just going to say straight up, I'm not part of any political party. I've never paid for membership of any political party. I've never been particularly interested in politics. But when your everyday Australian citizens are taking note of the disastrous political situation we have in Canberra, where our elected political parties are just causing an absolute mess of our lifestyle, then it's our responsibility to take a little bit more notice, do a little bit more depth of research, especially into their policies, and elect people into place that have Australia's 28 million of us, their everyday interests at heart. I don't think the current Labor and Liberal are doing a very good job of that. But as it relates to free speech, I think One Nation, and I haven't even decided whether or not I'd even vote for them, but they are the only political party that is actually willing to hold a referendum and ask 28 million people, do you want your free speech protected? If so, it will be enshrined into the Constitution for every future generation. I think that speaks volumes for that particular policy. It would be great if there was more than one political party willing to do that, because why do political parties want to silence their citizens? That's not the type of leadership I personally trust. Everyone should be able to speak their mind, but always be responsible for your actions. So what does it have? What it does have is constitutionally implied freedom of political communication. So this is not symbolic. It is real law, and it's been enforced by the Federal High Court. So I have found about 15 different cases where the implied freedom of political communication has been held up by the High Court, and the High Court is above Parliament and definitely above the Prime Minister. So it is a real thing. Like Chat GPT has nailed it on the head here. It is real law. So what does the implied freedom of political communication actually mean? The High Court has repeatedly held, starting with Lang versus Australian Broadcasting Corporation, that because Parliament must be directly chosen by the people, Australians must be free to communicate about political and government matters. What this means in practice, the freedom belongs to the system of governments, not to individuals personally. One Nation wants to change that. They want to enshrine it in the Constitution. If 28 million people want their freedom of speech enshrined in the Constitution, that way it attaches to you as an individual, one of us, 28 million Australian people. Is that wrong? Is it wrong to teach your kids to say what's on your mind? Absolutely not. Why are we being so inhumane as to force people to repress their thoughts and teach people you're not allowed to say what's on your mind? You want people to say what's on their mind, because then you know that's what they're thinking. It's a fundamental human right. And if people are saying what you don't want to hear, then you know who to stay away from. But if we're conditioning people to not say what they are thinking, then you don't really know who's got your best interests at heart. It's the fundamental basics of democracy over the last 1800 years, but sorry, I digress. So I repeat that. What this means in practice, the freedom belongs to the system of government, not to individuals personally. But laws that burden political speech can be struck down if they go too far. So what counts as political communication? Criticism of government, public policy debate, international affairs, religion when discussed politically, extremism, security, human rights, immigration, race, law, social values. Your discussions clearly fall inside this category. And again, like we were just saying before, with all those protected groups, I think they're just trying to draw a very thin line in a very grey area about, you can talk about some things, but you can't stray and attribute that to humans. That's when they got a problem. And especially when you get in hateful verbs, I'm going to do this or that, and I'm going to do it against X, Y, and Z, and these people deserve this or that. I think this hate speech law really is trying to define talking about people and talking about ideas, which just leaves a lot of room from, our Australian culture has always been, you can say what you want and you can say things in anger or, emotion or sadness or whatever, but people weren't ever going to hold you accountable and put you in prison for it. But this seems to really want to police people's thoughts and hold people accountable, even though the context of some conversations may be innocent, but it can get people landed in prison now, which I think is a step too far towards communism, in my political opinion, while I still have it. And perhaps we need to take a good interest in the policies that will protect our Australian interests at the next federal election. Labor and Liberal, I think their time has expired. We need some more Australian citizens that actually have Australians' interests at heart, that are capable of either joining some of these better parties and actually putting policies in effect that actually protect your interests, rather than just lining their own pockets. And again, this is all from Chat GPT as an assessment against the Explanatory Memorandum of the hate speech law. So how does this hate bill fit within the constitutional limits? Based on the Explanatory Memorandum you provided, you're welcome. The bill has been explicitly drafted to survive constitutional challenge, really drawing a fine line between what is and what's not allowed. The bill is not intended to infringe the implied freedom of political communication. It does not criminalise lawful political communication. What constitutes lawful political communication seems to be where the grey area is. It targets conduct, not opinion. So we should be able to discuss ideas without actually being told that's hate speech. It targets incitement to hatred or violence, not criticism. So we should still be able to freely criticise pretty much anything, but not criticising people. I somewhat agree with it, but I think there's a lot of room to sort of misinterpret it and use it and weaponize it against innocent people. And, not everyone wants to go to prison. And to think innocent people could be landed in prison for up to 5 years or 15 years. Let us know in the comments which one it is. I haven't actually looked that up. That's devastating, especially if we're just having a conversation that could be misconstrued and misinterpreted from third parties listening in, rather than looking at it, the actual context of the people involved. But obviously we don't have completely innocent people in this whole country. Otherwise it would be a boring place, right? So ChatGPT says what the bill actually restricts, and these are clear boundaries. Speech that can be restricted, only speech that meets all of the following. Public. So I interpret that as private conversations cannot be held against you unless they're on public forums of some sort. Hopefully they're not arresting people for odd comments that are going to be misinterpreted. Because that's a big grey area. They could really get some people that you meant this and you meant that when it's just taken out of context. Targets people, not ideas, based on protected attributes. So that list that we first spoke about just before, that would be the race, the ethnicity, the national origin, the colour, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, intersex status, and disability. And those are the protected attributes that we can't violate. And you can't incite hatred, violence, or serious harm against those protected attributes of humans, of people, and it cannot create a real risk to the community. It has to be able to create a real risk to the community. So, you can get all philosophical on that one, but hopefully we can take a common sense approach with this. Speech that remains protected. I like this one. Criticising governments, Australian or foreign. Yeah, I think criticising religions, ideologies, doctrines, scriptures. Yes, I did look this up and it did give me an example. Muslims, that's a personal attribute that can't be criticised. Christians, personal attribute, can't be criticised. That's what I think this bill's getting at. Jews, that's a race of people. They can't be criticised. But the doctrines and the text and the scriptures and the books are thoughts that have turned into ideas, and we can still debate ideas. I don't think it's actually still protecting that. So moral condemnation of ideas, you can still morally condemn ideas, which good. We should be able to do that because we all see things from different perspectives. Debate about extremism, absolutely. Discussion of slavery, child abuse, terrorism, absolutely. Even though this may go onto some of these protected areas, but from a political perspective, the United Nations Human Rights Commission, I'll have to double check that's actually what it's called, that they still list parts of Africa as having modern day slavery where women and children are enslaved. Hopefully they can stop soon, but we shouldn't have our political opinion or debate being able to be limited away from talking about those topics. How do you fix something unless you're able to talk about it? So harsh political language. So we can use harsh political language. The public office is they're running up bills, they're not accountable for the money they're spending, and they're causing massive amounts of inflation. Those should be able to do that, not land in jail. Offensive opinions about ideas. Absolutely. The bill does not prohibit disagreement, offense, moral judgment, criticism, satire, moral judgment. So that is pretty much a summary of what Chat GPT has broken down the 500-page hate speech bill into the 300-page explanatory memorandum. And it's basically just given us everything that we've just gone across. So that's not my writing or anything like that. I've basically taken ChatGPT's, which is regarded as an accurate PhD expert in anything you ask. And that's the slides that it's given me. And I've just put that into Grok for a little bit of, hope you enjoy the pictures. That's about the limit of my expertise in this stuff. And yeah, if you get values out of it, give us a thumbs up, like, subscribe, share, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching to the end. I did forget about putting this into the front of it. If you want to actually download the actual explanatory memorandum for your own reading, it's about 200 pages or so. If you go into Google and Google Australian Government Attorney General's Department Explanatory Memorandum, it'll be the first returning document. Click on the web page, scroll down here where it says download, and then it just downloads as a PDF. So if you want to run that through your own ChatGPT and see what you come up with, or just have a 200-page easy read, go for it. Thanks again. See you later.